At dawn on September 12, 1683, on the heights of Kahlenberg above Vienna, the air was cold, damp, and strangely quiet for a place surrounded by war. Below the wooded slopes, smoke hung over the city walls where exhausted defenders had been holding out for nearly 2 months. Ottoman trenches cut through the ground like dark scars, and beyond them stood one of the largest armies Europe had seen in generations. Vienna was weak, hungry, and close to breaking. The men on the hill knew the numbers were against them. They also knew that if the city fell, the road into Central Europe would open. This battle changed Central Europe forever. And if you stay with me, you'll see how one desperate morning turned into something no one expected. To understand Vienna in 1683, we have to begin with a simple fact. This was not just a battle for one city. For more than a century, the Ottoman Empire and the Habsburg monarchy had been pushing against each other across Hungary and the lands of Central Europe. The Ottomans had already reached Vienna once before, in 1529, and although that earlier siege failed, the city remained a symbol. It was the gate. If Vienna fell, the Danube corridor opened wider, and the Habsburg heartland would be exposed. By the late 17th century, Hungary was divided, restless, and dangerous. Many Hungarian nobles disliked Habsburg rule. Some resented imperial taxation, religious pressure, and the loss of old privileges. One of the most important rebel leaders was Imre Thököly, a Hungarian nobleman who turned to the Ottoman Empire for support. He did not need to conquer Vienna himself. He needed Ottoman power to weaken the Habsburgs. For the Ottoman Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, that crisis looked like an opportunity. Kara Mustafa was not a minor commander looking for a raid. He was the Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire, the man directing imperial policy in the name of Sultan Mehmed IV. He had ambition, confidence, and a dangerous belief that a great victory in Central Europe could secure his name forever. Instead of simply supporting Hungarian rebels or taking smaller fortresses, he aimed at Vienna itself. That decision changed everything. In the spring and summer of 1683, the Ottoman army moved north and west. Its full size is debated by historians because early reports often counted not only fighting men but also servants, labourers, camp followers, and support personnel. Still, even cautious estimates make it clear that the force was enormous. It included Janissaries, Sipahi cavalry, artillerymen, engineers, miners, Crimean Tatars, and troops from Ottoman vassal states such as Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania. Against this came Vienna, defended by walls, bastions, and men who knew help might arrive too late. Emperor Leopold I did not remain inside the city. As the Ottoman army approached, he left Vienna with his court. That decision has often been criticized, but from his point of view, the emperor's capture would have been a political disaster. Still, to ordinary people inside Vienna, it must have felt like abandonment. The ruler was gone. The army outside was growing. The city had to survive on its own. The man who stayed was Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg. Starhemberg's defining trait was endurance. He did not need to win a glorious field battle. He needed to hold stone, earth, and broken walls long enough for someone else to arrive. His job was brutal in its simplicity. Keep the garrison alive, repair damage, stop mines. Keep discipline, keep hope from disappearing. Outside the city, Kara Mustafa prepared for a siege. He chose not to immediately storm Vienna with everything he had. Instead, he built trenches, placed artillery, and began the slow work of breaking the defences. Ottoman siege warfare was not primitive. Their engineers were skilled. Their miners knew how to dig toward bastions, pack tunnels with explosives, and tear open walls from below. The defenders understood the danger. A cannonball could kill a man. A mine could kill a section of the city. Far away, another ruler now had to make a decision. John III Sobieski, King of Poland, had signed an alliance with the Habsburgs. If Vienna was attacked, Poland would come to its aid. Sobieski was a soldier king, experienced against Ottoman and Tatar forces, and he understood cavalry warfare better than almost anyone in Europe. But getting to Vienna was not simple. A relief army had to be assembled from different powers with different commanders, different languages, and different interests. Imperial troops, German states, and Polish forces all had to move toward the same battlefield at the same time. That required trust, timing, and discipline. The pressure grew day by day. Inside Vienna, food became scarce, disease spread. The smell of smoke, sweat, dust, and sickness filled the city. Outside, Ottoman trenches crept closer. Every day, the defenders heard digging beneath them. Every night they wondered whether the next explosion would open the way. This was the first layer of the battle, personal survival. For a soldier on the wall, the issue was not empire. It was whether he could stay awake, whether his powder stayed dry, whether the wall under his feet would still be there in the morning. The second layer was national survival. For the Habsburg monarchy, Vienna was not just a capital city. It was the centre of administration, prestige, and imperial identity. If it fell, the political shock would be enormous. The third layer was civilizational, at least in the way people at the time understood it. Both sides framed the conflict in religious terms. The Ottoman army carried the authority of an Islamic empire. The defenders and relief troops saw themselves as protecting Christian Europe. Modern historians can describe the politics more carefully, but the men marching and praying in 1683 often understood the moment through faith, fear, and duty. That is why Vienna mattered so much. By September, the city was close to the edge. Ottoman mines had damaged the outer defences. The garrison was exhausted. The relief army was approaching, but the city did not know whether it would arrive in time. And on the wooded heights west of Vienna, the final act began to take shape. The battlefield of Vienna was not a flat open field where two armies simply lined up and charged. It was a city, a siege camp, a river landscape, and a chain of wooded hills, all connected by roads, slopes, villages, vineyards, and rough ground. The geography mattered from the first hour to the last. Vienna stood near the Danube, protected by walls and bastions that had been modernized over time to resist artillery. These were not medieval curtain walls alone. They were defensive works shaped by the age of gunpowder, angled bastions, outerworks, ditches, ravelins, and earth-packed positions designed to absorb cannon fire. The Ottomans placed their camp mainly south and west of the city. Their trenches moved toward vulnerable points in the defences, especially around the Berg Bastion, the Lobel Bastion, and nearby outer works. Their goal was not simply to frighten Vienna. They wanted to get close enough to mine the walls and create a breach. Mining was slow, dirty, and terrifying. Ottoman sappers dug underground galleries toward the defences. They listened for counterminers. They packed chambers with powder. If the explosion worked, the earth would jump, stone would fall, and men above would vanish in dust. The defenders dug countermines of their own, trying to find and destroy the tunnels before they reached the walls. So while people often remember Vienna for the cavalry charge, much of the siege was fought in darkness underground. To the west and northwest of the city rose the Vienna woods and heights around Kahlenberg. These hills became the key to the relief battle. The relief army had to move through wooded, uneven ground before it could descend toward the Ottoman positions. This slowed movement, especially for artillery and cavalry, but it also gave the Allies a major advantage. If they could reach the heights, they could look down over the Ottoman camp, an attack from a direction Kara Mustafa could not ignore. The Ottoman army was powerful, but it was also spread out. Its infantry included janissaries, disciplined soldiers, who formed the core of Ottoman battlefield strength. Its cavalry included sipahis, armed horsemen tied to the empire's military land system. Crimean Tatar cavalry gave the army speed, scouting and raiding power. There were artillery crews, engineers, miners, and large numbers of support personnel needed to feed and move such a huge force. The Ottoman weapons reflected the period. Muskets, sabres, bows still used by some cavalry, lances, artillery, grenades, and siege explosives all had their place. This was not a clean age of weapon replacing another. It was a mixed battlefield where gunpowder, steel, horses, and earthworks all mattered. Inside Vienna, Starhemberg had a much smaller force. The defenders included regular soldiers, militia, volunteers, artillery crews, and civilians pressed into the work of survival. Some estimates place the garrison around 11,000 soldiers, with several thousand additional armed volunteers. Exact numbers vary, but the imbalance was obvious. Vienna could not defeat the Ottoman army alone. Its strategy was to endure, repair the walls, hold the bastions, watch the mines, save powder. Keep men in position, send messages when possible, signal the relief army. Do not collapse before help arrives. The relief army was a coalition, and coalitions are never simple. The imperial forces under Charles of Lorraine formed one major part. German contingents from Bavaria, Saxony, Franconia and Swabia added strength. Then came the Polish army under John III Sobieski, including cavalry that Europe would remember for centuries, the Winged Hussars. The Winged Hussars were not a fantasy image. They were heavy cavalry, often armed with long lances, sabres, pistols and armour. The wings associated with them have become famous, though historians debate exactly how widely and in what form they were worn in battle. What matters militarily is this: Polish heavy cavalry was trained to deliver a shock charge with discipline and force. But cavalry could not win alone. Before any charge could happen, infantry and artillery had to fight through the difficult ground. The Allied army had to descend from the hills, push back Ottoman resistance, and create enough space for cavalry to form. A charge that began too early in broken terrain could become a disaster. This is where command decisions mattered. Kara Mustafa knew a relief army was coming. The question was how he would respond. He could fully abandon the siege effort and concentrate against the army on the heights. He could try to storm Vienna before the relief army arrived. Or he could do what he actually did: continue pressure on the city while also turning forces to meet the coalition. That decision became one of the central mistakes of the campaign. It is easy to judge from a distance. Kara Mustafa still believed Vienna might fall. His miners had done serious damage. The city was weak. If he pulled away completely, he might lose the chance to take the prize he had come for. But by keeping his attention divided, he allowed the relief army to gain momentum. The night before the battle, the camps must have felt very different. Inside Vienna, men waited behind damaged walls, listening for sounds from the hills. They had lived so long under bombardment that even silence could feel threatening. Some prayed. Some slept in short, broken moments. Some probably wondered whether the relief army was real or only a rumour moving through exhausted streets. In the Ottoman camp, soldiers prepared for another day of siege and battle. Fires burned. Horses shifted. Officers carried orders. The army had been outside Vienna for weeks, and long sieges wear down attackers too. Disease, supply problems, fatigue and uncertainty did not spare the besiegers. On the heights, the coalition army prepared to descend. For many of the men, this was not just a military operation. Priests said prayers. Commanders reviewed positions. Soldiers checked muskets, powder, blades, saddles, straps and lances. Cavalrymen knew that if they were used, they would be used late, after hours of hard fighting. Sobieski understood the moment. He was not just arriving to save a city. He was arriving at the edge of a siege that had nearly succeeded. Below him, Vienna was waiting. On the morning of September 12, the battle began with noise rolling through the hills. Muskets cracked from the broken ground. Artillery fired from positions that had taken enormous effort to bring through the woods. Smoke drifted between trees and vineyards. Men moved downhill in uneven lines, trying to keep formation while the land itself fought against them. The relief army did not simply burst onto the field in one perfect motion. It had to work its way down from the heights. The left and centre of the coalition, including Imperial and German troops, made the first serious contact. Charles of Lorraine and the other Allied commanders pushed their men forward against Ottoman positions west of Vienna. The fighting was slow, hard, and confusing. Villages, walls, slopes, orchards, and vineyards broke up the field. By mid-morning, the Ottoman army had been forced to turn part of its strength away from Vienna. That mattered. For weeks, the city had been the centre of Ottoman pressure. Now the besiegers had to face outward. Every unit sent against the relief army was a unit not being used to finish the breach. Every hour of fighting on the slopes gave Vienna another hour to live. But the Ottomans did not collapse at first. Their soldiers resisted fiercely. Janissaries and other infantry fought from prepared positions and rough cover. Ottoman cavalry tried to respond where the ground allowed it. The coalition advance was not clean. It was a grinding movement through smoke, musket fire, and broken terrain. Inside Vienna, the defenders could hear the battle. Imagine what that must have been like. For nearly 2 months, Starhemberg's men had watched the Ottomans dig closer. They had seen walls split and outerworks fall. They had fought fires, disease, fear, and exhaustion. Now they heard a different sound from beyond the siege lines, not the usual rhythm of bombardment. A larger battle. Help had arrived, but arrival was not victory. By noon, the battle had widened. The Allied infantry and cavalry continued to press down from the hills. The Ottoman army had to stretch itself across 2 problems: the city in front of it and the relief army behind and above it. This was the danger Kara Mustafa had created for himself. A siege army is powerful when it controls time, pressure, and position. It becomes vulnerable when forced to turn around and fight a field battle while its trenches and camps remain tied to the walls. The terrain still slowed the Allies. Guns had to be dragged into useful positions. Cavalry could not charge effectively through every patch of wooded or broken ground. Commanders had to wait until the battlefield opened. That patience mattered. Hours passed, and the fighting became a test of endurance. The Imperial and German troops carried much of the early burden. They pushed against Ottoman resistance, took ground, lost men, and kept moving. This part of the battle is often overshadowed by the famous cavalry charge. But without these hours of pressure, the final charge would not have had the same effect. Sobieski watched for the right moment. He had cavalry, but he also had a problem. Heavy cavalry needs space, timing, and direction. A charge down from the heights could be devastating if the enemy line was restrained. It could fail if launched into bad ground or prepared defences. So the Polish king waited while the battle unfolded below him. By early afternoon, the Ottoman position was becoming more dangerous. Their camp was huge, filled with tents, supplies, animals, artillery, servants' baggage, and everything needed to maintain a long siege. That camp was a sign of strength during the siege. During the relief battle, it became a weakness. If the Allies broke through, there was too much to defend and too much to lose. Kara Mustafa still hoped to hold the field and take the city, but hope is not a plan. He had not destroyed the relief army before it reached the heights. He had not pulled his full strength away from the siege in time. He had allowed the coalition to develop its attack from above Vienna. Now the battle was slipping into a shape that favoured the Allies. By mid-afternoon, the pressure increased. Coalition troops gained more ground. Ottoman formations bent under repeated attacks. Smoke thickened over the field, orders moved slowly. Units lost contact, horses panicked. Men who had spent weeks in siege work now had to fight a mobile battle against fresh forces descending from the hills. The defenders inside Vienna began to understand that the balance might be turning. For Starhemberg, this was still not a moment to relax. A siege can kill a city at the last minute. If an Ottoman mine opened the wall, if discipline failed, if panic spread, Vienna could still fall even with help nearby. So the defenders remained at their posts, watching, listening, and holding. Then came the moment everyone remembers. Sobieski prepared the cavalry. Polish horsemen, including the Winged Hussars, formed with allied cavalry from the coalition. This was not a small raid. It was a massed cavalry attack, one of the largest of its kind in European history. The exact number involved is debated, but the effect is not. Thousands of horsemen were brought into position for a decisive strike. The timing was crucial. The Ottoman army had already been fighting for hours. Its attention was divided. Its lines were strained. Its camp lay exposed. The ground ahead was finally usable enough for cavalry to move with force. By late afternoon, the charge began. It did not need exaggerated language. The reality was powerful enough. Heavy cavalry moved downhill toward the Ottoman positions. Lances lowered, horses gathered speed. Men who had waited through hours of battle now committed everything in one movement. The sound was unmistakable. Hooves, metal, shouting, leather, breath, and the rising thunder of massed horses closing distance. For the Ottoman troops, in the path of that charge, the danger was immediate. Infantry could resist cavalry if formed steady and properly supported. But an army already stretched and shaken is not the same as a fresh line waiting on open ground. The coalition cavalry hit at a moment when Ottoman cohesion was weakening. The impact broke more than bodies. It broke confidence. Ottoman resistance gave way in sections. Men fell back toward the camp. Some units tried to stand. Others began to retreat. In a battle like this, collapse does not always happen everywhere at once. It spreads. One group sees another falling back. An officer disappears. A horse bolts. A banner drops. A road fills with men moving the wrong way. Then fear begins to move faster than orders. Kara Mustafa's army had come to Vienna with enormous confidence. It had surrounded one of Europe's great cities. It had dug toward its walls and nearly broken them. But now, with the relief army descending and cavalry driving into the camp, the siege turned into a disaster. The Ottoman camp became a scene of confusion. Tents, wagons, animals, artillery, supplies and treasure filled the area. Soldiers tried to escape. Others tried to protect equipment. Some fought, some ran. The very size of the army made retreat harder. A small force can sometimes withdraw quickly. A giant siege army carries too much with it. As evening approached, the Ottoman army was no longer conducting a siege. It was trying to survive. The Allies pushed into the abandoned positions. The pressure on Vienna lifted. For the first time in weeks, the city was not being slowly strangled. The defenders had held long enough. The relief army had arrived in time. Kara Mustafa had lost the field. The pursuit continued as Ottoman forces withdrew. Not every Ottoman soldier was destroyed. Many escaped. The Ottoman Empire did not end that night. But the campaign against Vienna had failed completely. The army left behind guns, equipment, supplies, and prestige. The psychological blow was enormous. Inside Vienna, the meaning of the day must have taken time to understand. Men who had expected another explosion under the walls now saw the besiegers gone. Civilians who had lived with hunger and fear heard different sounds in the streets. The city had survived, not because one thing had gone right, but because many things had held just long enough. Starhemberg had held the walls. Charles of Lorraine and the Imperial German forces had carried the early fight. Sobieski had delivered the decisive strike. and Kara Mustafa had made the mistake that allowed all of it to come together. He had tried to take Vienna and defeat the relief army at the same time. In the end, he did neither. The morning after the battle, the ground around Vienna told the stories more honestly than any speech could. The Ottoman camp lay abandoned, tents stood open, supplies were scattered. Artillery pieces, tools, animals, baggage, and personal belongings remained behind. The camp had been built for a long siege, not a sudden flight, and that made the scale of the defeat visible to everyone who walked through it. For the defenders of Vienna, the sight must have been difficult to process. For weeks, the Ottoman army had been a constant presence outside the walls. Its trenches had crept closer, its guns had fired. Its mines had threatened to tear the city open from below. Now that same army was gone, leaving behind the remains of a campaign that had nearly succeeded. Casualty figures for the battle vary depending on the source, and older accounts often exaggerate numbers. A careful script should avoid pretending there is one perfect figure. What can be said clearly is that Ottoman losses were heavy, especially during the collapse and treaty, while the coalition also suffered thousands of casualties during the hard fighting before the final charge. The material losses were also serious. The Ottomans abandoned artillery, ammunition, food stores, tents, and wealth accumulated in the camp. For an army that had operated far from its centre of power, such losses mattered. Weapons could be replaced, men could be recruited. But prestige was harder to recover. Kara Mustafa Pasha escaped the battlefield, but he could not escape responsibility. After the defeat, he retreated through Ottoman territory. The failure at Vienna was too large to excuse. By order of Sultan Mehmed IV, Kara Mustafa was executed later in 1683, reportedly by strangulation with a silk cord, the traditional method for high Ottoman officials. His death showed how seriously the empire viewed the disaster. But the fighting did not end with Vienna. The battle saved the city, but it also opened a wider war. The Habsburgs and their allies now had momentum. The Ottoman army had failed at the most important point of the campaign, and European powers understood that the balance might be changing. The battlefield itself remained full of reminders: broken weapons, damaged earthworks, burned areas, dead horses, bodies waiting to be buried, men searching for friends, priests praying over the fallen, soldiers taking what could be used, civilians stepping out from a city that had almost become a ruin. Victory did not make the scene clean. It only made survival real. Vienna in 1683 did not destroy the Ottoman Empire in a single day. That is important to say clearly. Empires do not usually break like glass. The Ottoman state remained powerful after Vienna. It still controlled vast territories. It still had armies, administrators, fortresses, and resources. But the battle changed the direction of the struggle in Central Europe. Before Vienna, the Ottoman campaign had been offensive. Kara Mustafa had come to take the Habsburg capital and reshape the balance of power. After Vienna, the initiative began to shift. The Habsburgs and their allies moved from desperate defense toward counterattack. The Great Turkish War followed, lasting for years. Step by step, Ottoman power in Hungary weakened. Habsburg armies pushed deeper into territory that had long been contested. The process was not instant, and it was not simple, but Vienna marked the turning point. In 1699, the Treaty of Karlowitz confirmed major Ottoman losses. Much of Hungary and Transylvania passed into Habsburg control. That treaty did not happen because of one cavalry charge alone, but the road to it began on the slopes outside Vienna. The military lesson is also clear. Vienna was not saved by bravery alone. It was saved by endurance, timing, terrain, logistics, coalition coordination, and command decisions. The city survived because Starhemberg held long enough. The relief army succeeded because it reached the high ground. Sobieski's cavalry charge worked because the earlier fighting had weakened the Ottoman position. Kara Mustafa failed because he allowed himself to remain trapped between a siege and a field battle. That is what makes the story so powerful. Vienna was nearly lost underground, in tunnels packed with powder. Then it was saved from above by an army descending from the hills. For the men inside the city, the battle was about living through one more day. For the commanders, it was about position, timing, and risk. For Europe, it became a symbol of a frontier that did not collapse. Centuries later, on the quiet slopes of Kahlenberg above modern Vienna, the ground no longer shakes with cavalry, but the shape of Europe still carries the memory of what happened there.